I talk a lot, and like, you're too noisy. I said, you don't have to be around me.
Friendship may actually go beyond just relating on a
superficial
basis.
There's the adage that says, show me your friends, and I'll tell you who you are.
Some of us who are not very good at regular visits, but because they are friends,
you have to,
in order to maintain that friendship.
Emotional state of the parents is usually directly proportional to the emotional state of the children.
Hello viewers, welcome to our favorite family show right here on Equa Television, The Living Room. A few episodes ago, we spoke about suicide, and because there was so much to talk about, we didn't finish. And we've decided to come back today to finish this discussion on suicide, and I hope we'll be able to finish today. So please, do not touch that dial, keep watching and hear so much more about suicide. My name is Amaka Ocheke, and here in the studio with me is Professor Teresa Madu.
Glad to be here.
And our psychiatrist in the house, Dr. Anna Gyang.
Thank you for having me.
Anna, thank you for coming again. She's a very busy woman, but she has graciously contributed to us from her very busy schedule. So before we delve into prevention of suicide, which is what we promised to do today, maybe we'll recap again what suicide is and the causes of suicide. Anna, we'll get you to talk about it again.
I think we have established that suicide is any act that a person carries out which is capable of taking his or her own life, and at the time that the person is carrying out the act, there was an intent to die. And if that intent is there, the person carries out the act but does not die, we call it attempted suicide or failed suicide. However, if a person carries out the act, whether he dies or not, if there was no intent, you call that deliberate self-harm. So deliberate self-harm sometimes can end in death. So basically the intent to die is what differentiates them. Now, suicide, from statistics, it has been proven that over 90% of those that die by suicide have a mental health problems, and in 90% of those cases it is depression. We also talked about the other 5 to 10% who might not have a mental health issue, might be as a result of several things. Sometimes it is due to people killing themselves for the greater good, like you have in
suicide bombers.
We call that altruistic suicide. Then those that kill themselves because they are not properly integrated into the community, like what you see in displaced persons, or sometimes even immigrants. We call it anomic suicide. Then we have egoistic suicide, where people carry out the suicidal attempts because their ideals and their values, it's something is happening against that, and then they now kill themselves. Then
what the Japanese do.
Yes. Then a lot of other theories that sociologists and psychologists have proposed. Those who are aggressive naturally sometimes can turn their aggression inwards. So that could also be a cause. But for mental illnesses, over 90% of them, it is depression. Then we have other mental health issues like bipolar affective disorder, schizophrenia, substance use. And the thing about substance use is that apart from it being an independent risk factor for suicide, it has been shown that over half of those that kill themselves actually carry out the act under the influence of psychoactive substances. So it's like to boost in
give you the courage.
Yes, the courage to kill yourself. So roughly those are the things that we talked about.
So Auntie Madu, want to ask, you've heard about suicide, probably you know people who have committed. how do you think it affects their families?
Let me even start from the workplace, because Anna had talked about it being a mental health issue. So from the HR point of view now, we've been trying to assess workers at workplace and see when they start tipping over and their behaviors begin to be irregular enough for us to be concerned and therefore ask for help. I think even when the victims are saying they love their parents, they love their loved ones, but the very act that they have committed puts their loved ones in a very deplorable position. It's paradoxical, but I think it's so devastating that even the loved ones need help to be able to cope with a suicide, because you are just not able to come to terms with the fact that this was a preventable death, if I will put it like that. Sometimes even parents of loved ones tip over. I know a woman here in Jos who, on account of what the son did, eventually also went into mental depression. When she died, we were not able to ascertain whether
Did it?
no, she didn't commit suicide, but we think that that precipitated all of the
Problems.
consequences, of that. So it has a lot of impact on, especially the parents or the immediate family, I should say.
Okay. So maybe later on we will try to address what we can do to support families who have suffered suicide. But how do we prevent suicide? Because that's what we promised our viewers we are going to talk about next time. How to prevent suicide.
I think suicide prevention is something that can be done at different levels. The first is from the family. We need to raise mentally healthy children. We need to raise resilient children where they are able to cope with the stresses of life, when they grow up and things like that. Now, generally, as children grow up, you cannot divulge them from what is happening in the family. So general mental health promotion, which we have talked about before, which starts from antenatal care, taking your antenatal vitamins, going for antenatal care, ensuring that you deliver in a safe hospital. All of those things help to in proper brain maturation, and eventually reduces the risks of developing mental health challenges. Then some of the practices that we do at home, some of the ways we raise our children. I mentioned earlier about the theory that people who are aggressive can actually turn their aggressive inwards, which might manifest as suicide. And a lot of the times, aggression is actually a learned behavior. So when parents are fighting and children grow up to be violent people, it increases their risks of carrying out violent acts even against themselves. So that was also very important. Then the things that our children watch, I can't remember whether I said it the last time that I saw young lady in JS1 who was writing a suicide note, but luckily her seatmates saw what she was writing and reported to the school authority, and she ended up in the hospital. And when I had a conversation with her, she had a well laid out plan of what exactly to do to kill herself. And when I asked her where she got that information from, because it was a bit technical, she got it from watching movies. So the kind of movies that our children watch, what we allow them to participate in, they are also very important. Sometimes in the bits to have them entertained, because we do not really have so much time, we just give them any and everything. And then in these days of internet, if you just go to Google and say how to kill yourself, you will see 101 ways, popping up and things like that. So you hear, just as before the program started, you were giving us an instance. I am sure that idea came from somewhere. He must have seen or read about it somewhere. So we need to be very careful, even as adults, what we feed into ourselves, because that eventually makes up what goes in our minds. And then when we are confronted with stress or when we are depressed, we tend to go to what we know. So it's not as if we should not have knowledge, but we have to be careful what kind of knowledge it is that we have. Then we also need to raise children that know how to communicate. That's one of the major things that is lacking in our generation these days. You see young people in psychological distress, but they cannot tell it to anyone. In fact, they prefer to chat about it, maybe put it on Facebook, on Instagram, but they are just not talking to people. And social media creates a kind of anonymity, so people talk anyhow. Somebody might be communicating distress and say something like, I am tired of life. If you go through the comments, half of the comments will be provocating. They would further make the person to go down emotionally. So people are very brutal, people are very rude, people are not empathetic on social media. So a lot of times solutions to those kind of things are not gotten on social media. So we have to raise children that can talk to themselves, and that starts by sometimes putting off the TVs. Or in fact, I don't believe in giving children phones, young children phones. They should learn to talk. Sometimes when their friends visit them, instead of them to go out to play, they all sit down and they are watching TV. They are not communicating with one another. So we need to try to get back to, I know that technology has made life easier and whatever, but then
also
we have to,
complicated
yes,
life.
we have to go back to maybe our era where we can sit down, we can say stories, we can play with sand, we can roll tires, and that gives us some kind of level of communication, so that when we grow, we grow up to be children that, or to be young adults that can talk with one another, that can listen to one another, that can empathize with one another. I think that is very important. It's a very important thing that is lacking in our generation.
Maybe I'll pause you there and let's see if Professor Madu has something to add about how to communicate in the family, how to make sure we're talking to each other.
Like Anna said, I think it starts early, but it's never too late to communicate. I think
if you start later, they may revolt, but you insist.
No, I think one of the things that parents are not doing is intentionally checking in with a child. Because particularly when they begin to withdraw, we need to check in with them and do more questions than, are you fine? Yes, I'm fine. No, we need to check in with, like I had a conversation with a young person. I overheard the music and it was very loud. And I was like, this music you're listening to, how is it helping you grow spiritually? No answer. I said, but you said the lyrics don't matter, and I didn't really listen to the lyrics, but would the lyrics help you grow? So I think communication requires checking internally with them. Even this after school checking. Don't just say, how was school? They'll say it was fine. You need to ask, what was the best part of school? What was that part of school that you didn't like? Check with their friends too. But I wanted to also add a little to what Anna had said about how we're raising children so that they are not resilient. I think we're overindulging. And overindulging simply means we think we had such a hard life. Our children shouldn't suffer as much as we suffer.
I hear parents say that all the time.
So it makes them ajebotas. And life is hard. Life is not easy. In any generation, life is not easy. But to give children the impression that because I suffered, they shouldn't suffer, it's also building less resilience from that. Even if you can afford to give them the things about life, they need to fight for life. Like this mental health thing, you actually fight for life rather than give in.
Okay, thank you for that. Hannah, back to you again.
Yeah, I wanted, when she talked about overindulging, I think also the environment we're living in now, the insecurity and everything has made us overprotective too. So We have children that we have done everything for. We have taken them to school all the days of their lives. We have taken them to church. We have not allowed them to even buy bread across the streets. You know, one of my closest friends, you know, had a child that was in, was it JS3 or SS1? And, you know, they were driving, they stopped by the roadside and said, just enter that shop, and said, can I do it? That was somebody that was in JS3 or SS1. And that was when it dawned on them that something is wrong here. We have to do something about it. And I understand that, yes, times are different. But in doing all of that, I think we need to let the children experience what life is, because there is an extent to which we can protect them. For those of them that are in the university, they will tell us about, you know, parents accompany their children to 100 level, and they would follow them, you know, everywhere, and help them with the registration process. But after then, you will discover that you have to leave the child. Then you go. We now have young people who, they fail one course, they are depressed, they are suicidal. A lecturer is harsh and they get depressed, they are suicidal. I think it's all a product of our upbringing. They have never understood what it means to be disappointed. They have never understood what it means to say no. And sometimes saying no can be painful. Something happened just very recently in my house. You know, my son's subscription finished DSTV and they are on midterm. Can you pay subscription? You know, he was pestering. And I told him I didn't have money. The next day, subscription. So I told my husband I was going to pay, and he said, no, don't pay this. Let this child not think that he would always get. And of course, I pitied him because they were home and I wasn't up to being with them. But I held on a little bit, you know. So sometimes it might be painful, sometimes it might not be what we want, but we really, really need to work hard to raise resilient children.
So even that saying no, for me too, I sometimes tell my children no, not because I can't afford it, or I just say no for, let them learn to accept no, because life gives you no's sometimes. And my younger daughter goes, but mommy, I said please. I said, yes, you said please, but I said no. And no is no. I stand by it. Say, mommy, it's not fair. I said, life isn't fair. You don't always get what you want. So that they can have that resilience to accept when something negative or something you want doesn't come your way. So that you can stand and not fall into pieces because you didn't get what you wanted.
But I also think as parents, we need to keep debriefing and
talking with them.
Rebriefing. Like with the TV incident, you could have also asked them, what did they learn by that deprivation? You know, this our young people, they don't even think. They will say, it's because you didn't want me to be happy. So I usually would debrief and say, do you know why we're doing this? Like I had something with a grown child today. And then I now say, I refuse this privilege. Do you know why I refuse the privilege? She said no. And she was crying, no. I'm like, you don't know why I took away this privilege. She said she didn't know. So I said, number one, this. Number two, this. I said, so that when somebody asks you, you will at least know why that privilege was taken away from you. Very, very entitled generation. Everywhere, you understand?
They are very entitled.
They go to class, maybe the lecturer was late, they themselves are late. There's no accountability.
It's very true. I think I'm going to do debriefing this debriefing this evening. We are going to talk about it.
Yes, it will be good to talk.
So I think that's it. Then another level is our churches. I think we need a lot of work there. You know, sometimes the kind of comments that we pass, the kind of things that we imply when we say certain things, they make it such that people who are going through psychological distress cannot talk about it until things are very bad.
Please give examples, because people need to know what we're doing wrong.
Yeah. So you know, I think we have said this on several fronts, but then I would repeat it, that suicidal thoughts and the suicide itself can be a symptom of, is often a symptom of mental
Mental
illness, and those that are going through it cannot help it. Just like you have malaria and you cannot help the headache or the abdominal pain that you might be feeling, that is how these people, that's how the situation is with people that are suicidal. I have seen people that have been suicidal, you treat them and they could not believe that they reached that extent. You know, in their life, they never. I have seen spiritual people who have attempted suicide. I have seen a pastor died. I think I shared it in the
Yes,
last.
you shared it during
A
last.
pastor killed himself, not because he lost his faith, but because he was sufficiently depressed. He got treatment, got better, then stopped the treatment. Depression came back and it was very severe. This man killed himself. It was very painful to watch, but it happens. So we need to see that depression, even suicidal thoughts, is not a measure of spirituality. So when we begin to say that people who are depressed, something is wrong with their character or their spirituality, they would not talk.
They don't
Some
have
of
faith.
some of the practices that we also do in church, I think we need to, I'm not a theologian, so I might not be able to draw very clear-cut lines, but I think that we need to show more empathy to people, even when people are falling away in the church, even when people fall into sin, the way we reprimand them, the way we correct them. I know someone who attempted suicide. She was raped and reported herself to the church. I was raped, I got pregnant. And so the whole story was, did you shout? Who saw you? Did you fight? What is the evidence that you know?
I was so disappointed.
The thing
in
just
that
kept
story. I was
going on
embarrassed.
and on and on until this person, you know, the family, she was placed under church discipline.
For being
And
raped. Can you
she
imagine
became
that?
depressed and
She would
attempted
be.
to kill herself. So things like that, I think we need to put more emphasis on having people whole, spirit, soul, and body. Sometimes when we focus just on the soul, you know, it's like we're trying to rescue the soul from hell so much that we forget
damage the
that
body
yes,
and damage every other
and
thing.
we damage every other thing. I think I found I think Jude towards the end, is it 22 or 25? I can't remember, but in Jude, the book of Jude, you know, there was a place that it talked about. There is, I'm paraphrasing now, there is a time to snatch people out of sin, as from you snatch them from the fire, but there are times that we need to treat them with gentleness. You know, it came in the same verse, you know, treating with gentleness and then snatching us out of the fire. So we need to be sensitive to know which situations do we need to treat with gentleness, which situations do we need to snatch out. And then sometimes the things that we say, I've also been in a situation where there was a discussion about a boy that killed himself. Well, they found his body in the dam or something like that, so it's assumed that he jumped into the dam and died. And someone was saying that, this one will never make heaven. You know, I had to quickly step in to correct. You know, when we say things like that, we damage the people who are left behind after suicide. You know, we make it more likely that they themselves will be depressed and eventually get suicidal. Those are some of the reasons why you see sometimes suicide running in families, because the responses often drives them, you know, to also killing themselves. So we need to be very careful. I also wish that our clergy would also look at, you know, I heard that in some places that when people kill themselves by suicide, you don't perform burial in the church for them, because, you know, definitely something is wrong. They have sinned and everything. But you're not punishing the person that died, even if he was wrong. And after all, I don't believe that everybody that killed themselves are going to hell, because if a person who was depressed, who has lost a rational thinking, kills himself, I believe that God is not a God of injustice, so he is not going to hell. It's a symptom. Because you see a suicidal person who is depressed, you give the person antidepressant, give the person 2 weeks, the person is no longer suicidal. That is enough to tell me that this is a physical, or this is a biological mechanism going on. So I don't believe in that. However, the whole message here is that we need to be careful. We need to create an environment in the church where people can actually be honest with their emotions. And they can only be honest with their emotions if we let people know that it is okay to feel to sometimes it is okay to be depressed. It is okay to even feel suicidal. When you feel suicidal and you tell me, I'm not condemning you, rather I'm
together get help
encouraging
for
you,
you.
and then I'm trying to get you to a source, of help. And then sometimes we need to be very careful too in churches, especially for those of us that have received miracles, and we would want to assume that everybody must receive miracles the same way, and then we parade our miracles before people. I'm not saying people should not give thanks or people should not give testimonies, but when we are using it in a way to
Test spirituality.
then if you received a miracle that was out of the grace and the mercies and the kindness of God, and he's not obliged to give everybody that miracle. Even when Jesus was on earth, people still died. People still, when he healed the paralytic by the pool of Siloam, there were plenty other people there that did not receive healing, and the Bible didn't tell us he had more faith than anybody. In fact, he didn't even have faith. He was thinking of something else. Jesus just decided to heal him out of his own mercies and kindness. So we need to be very careful in trying to generalize that God will snap everybody out of depression. God will turn people's morning into dancing again by the next morning. We need to be very careful. I think that is another level of prevention. I don't know.
So we'll go on break now, and then when we come back, we'll put up our numbers on the screen so that viewers, you can call in, make your comments, and contribute to the conversation. So we'll go on break right now, and we'll come back shortly.
Make your everyday informative, make your everyday count. Know your world. Daily affairs, national and international, with authentic news events as they unfold on Global News and Zoom on Nigeria, Monday to Friday at 1 p.m.
So viewers, welcome back from our break. Sorry I'm laughing, but somebody has said something that made me laugh. But well, we've been talking about suicide. Not something to really laugh about, but well, in Jesus there's hope. That's what makes us laugh and smile. So we've talked about causes of suicide and what we can do to help prevent suicide. And we're back to it. We ended on the note of talking about what churches are doing and what we're saying in church to our brethren to worsen the issues of suicide and what we shouldn't do. So Professor Teresa Amadu has been here with us and Dr. Anna Gyang talking about suicide. So maybe we'll still say a few things about what we church people are doing to worsen suicide. But while we're on it, our phone number is right there on the screen. You can call in to contribute to this conversation. So, Professor Amadu, you were saying something that we say in church to dismiss problems.
I think it's not only in churches, but anytime I hear somebody say it is well, I know that it is not well. It means that something is wrong, but they are not ready to talk about it, and then they now say it is well. I think we need to probe further and say, okay, if it is well, how well is it? Let's talk about what is well. And then you find out that there's a keg of problems that they are just dismissing with the word, it is well.
I think as Dr. Gyang had said earlier, we sometimes create an environment in the church that people don't feel safe to talk about their problems. So it's like you're expected to say positive, confess positively about everything going on around you. So even when things are going down, if somebody asks you, how are you doing? You say it is well. And I don't know what that means. Or like when we're in university, say, how did the exams go? That really used to irritate me. They said the Lord is on the throne. I'm like, did he ever come down? What do you mean?
No, the other one is he's in control.
He's in control.
God is helping us.
So what if somebody, yes, I know that you can give a blanket or a whatever if you feel somebody really doesn't care. But if somebody is really concerned about you, why don't you tell the person, my sister, there's fire on the mountain. This is, this exactly is going on. People can pray with you, encourage you, point you in the right direction. So, okay, this one, you need to see a psychiatrist. How will I go? Okay, I can go along with you. I can accompany you. So that we show ourselves love and encouragement in the right direction. Instead of glossing over everything and pretending because we're Christians, everything is fine. We don't have problems. And that's a lie. Even Job had problems.
Yeah, I think we have lost the art of being sincere. We are just not sincere people. And I know that there are several instances in the Bible that Jesus responded to people's sincerity. The example that comes to mind is the man that asked Jesus to help his son. The son, he said, my son is dying. And then Jesus asked him if he believed. And he said, I believe, help my unbelief. He was very sincere. And Jesus still healed his child. I think one of the things that we need to open up our mind is that acknowledging that there is a problem doesn't mean that I don't have faith. I have a problem, but I have faith. That is what Psalm is all about. David would talk about the situation as it is, then he will say, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Lamentations would talk about the problems, then he would say, even though I will do this. So we need to learn how to be honest. And I think another thing that church we need to do we need to learn to be confidential. We are very bad at maintaining confidentiality.
We share it as prayer
points. We either share it as
make
prayer
it sound
point,
spiritual.
or I have heard young people say, I'm not saying this so that I won't be used for preaching. If I confide in you and you come, even if you don't say my name and you're saying it in on the pulpit, definitely the person feels bad and they don't want to
but also
talk
for
about
that
it.
one about pulpit, we also need to understand that sometimes it's not only your story. There are many people who have similar problems, and maybe the pastor wants to address it at once so that everybody hears. So it may not particularly be your own story, but may have been a story or something that is afflicting a lot of people.
Yeah, one of the things that I have learned in mental health is the art of saying stories in such a way that it does not point to any other.
No. At that point, you shouldn't do it.
It doesn't point to any other, no identifier, no similarity in. And then if, for example, a story came from this church, I make sure that until the day I'm transferred to like Sokoto, before I can repeat that kind of story. If not, people are very sensitive to this kind of
and
things.
then even if you are telling the story, you're like, so somebody in this church will be like, okay, is it a mad? Is it the gangs? Who did it? You are curious now to know who. And then if you are bold enough, you can go and meet pastor after. Say, pastor, who is that person? And all that. So people don't feel safe.
Then I think generally as people living in the community, I think we need to improve our neighborliness. We are losing the act. I'm very guilty of that too. I rarely enter my neighbors' houses. I rarely know what they are going through, and you would be in that environment and someone is there unable to feed his family, their children are not going to school. Your neighbor might be going through domestic violence, emotional abuse. You don't know. We are no longer our neighbor's keepers, and I think that's one of the things that the Bible talks about. And
I think in the book of John, Jesus keeps emphasizing love, that we should love one another as he has loved us. And I've been asking myself, am I measuring up?
We need to do that, and we need to go back to the act of, communal raising of children, where your neighbor is your children's father and mother. But these days, if somebody, women have fought because a neighbor was doing something with their children. So
Everybody is
things like that,
suspicious.
yes.
Yeah.
So we need to bring back the sense of community. There is what is called community resilience. Even if an adverse situation happens in your community, in a community that generally were cohesive and supportive of one another, the effects of the distress will not be that much as those that are all to themselves. So we need to improve that as a community. Then the issue of psychoactive substance use, I think, is something that I don't know what can be done.
I don't know what we can do.
But the issue, these days, drug abuse is everywhere. Men, women, children, adults, everybody is just abusing one. And then the things that people are abusing are metamorphosing every single day.
Something new is coming out.
Something new is coming out. And then
okay, we have a call.
Okay, I thought it's the number for the live show.
Yes, you are on the live show, the living room.
So what I called for was like, honestly,
Yes, he's
the
still trying to
we
decide
thank
whether he's
God
talking.
for everything going on.
so
country.
and then the kind of substances that we are using these days, or young people are abusing these days, are getting harder and harder. Even in Jos, in the past, cocaine was not available, then it became very available. Now it's methamphetamines that people are abusing, and things like that. So it makes drugs increases our risk of being impulsive. So a person that uses psychoactive drug is the person that when the thought of suicide passes through, before they process it, they have acted it. In fact, sometimes they might not even be intending to die like that. They might not be planning anything. But because drug increases the impulsivity, the thought just flashes and then the person carries it out before he even realizes it. So we have to be very careful. And, abusing psychoactive substances has to do with the prevention has to start from the home. Parents, don't abuse anything. Even if it is alcohol, little alcohol, just leave it alone. Because if you are using them, chances are that your children will use something higher. That is just how it goes. So we have to be really very careful about that. And other drugs of abuse that we are not talking about it in the church, we try to avoid alcohol and all the hard drugs, but we are abusing tablets. Women are taking Phenergan, taking Puritan, taking all manners of things to help them sleep, while the problem is emotional distress. Those medications will just help you to sleep off, but the problem keeps growing. And before you realize it, things get out of hand. The others for the government, for me, I don't like talking about government too much, because whether they do it or they don't do, but I believe have the responsibility to take care of myself and my immediate neighbor. Whether the government does it or not, we need to take care of ourselves. So and then we need to also be talking about these things.
Okay,
let's normalize talking about suicide, so that if a suicide happens in a family, they can also talk about it with that. Because what is happening is that we don't even get accurate statistics about suicide because people are hiding it. So she talked about the impact. Research has shown that for every one case of suicide, you have at least 15 people that will come down with a psychological problem because of that suicide. Then you have at least 35 people that are affected adversely from that one suicide. So you see that it affects people, but we cannot talk about it. Anybody that dies by suicide, the grieving in their family is different. Grief, it's bad. When a person dies normal way, when we say normal, illnesses, accidents, all those things that happen. But when it's by suicide, the grief is very different, because they are struggling with guilt. They are struggling with, what did I do right? What did I do wrong?
And then sometimes
they are struggling with stigma. They are struggling with what people
Anna,
are
do you
saying.
know that sometimes the parents trade blames?
Yes.
Because
so it even affects the relationship between spouses.
they trade blames. Like a family I knew very well, it wasn't even suicide. Their toddler ran over an electrical wire, and he was wearing polyester. So it was very difficult to take the clothes off of him. Eventually died. For years, the mother kept feeling like the father blamed her for being negligent. So there are trading of blame. So apart from just the sadness, there's also the guilt of, if I had done this, if I had done this, if I had done this. There's nothing you can do when it has already happened.
And we need to be open-minded. That's another thing, you know, we're just jumping everywhere. Church, Christians, we need to be open-minded. Knowledge is dynamic. You know, the Bible encourages us to seek knowledge. It says the glory of God to conceal a matter, but how is it put? It's kings that finds it out. So let's be open-minded. What you know, our knowledge is limited. You are a human being. No matter your level of education, no matter your level of spirituality, you're still a human being. So you're limited in knowledge. Let's learn to open up our minds to learn the things that other people. For the doctors, for the scientists, it's still God. Is what God has permitted us to know that we know. I believe that there are several other things that we probably don't know about.
Not
because
probably, we don't
know
know
about because God has, in fact, there are things that we have not discovered yet as human beings, because God has kept it away from us. But the ones that He has given us the grace to discover, let's open, as long as it is not against the scripture. I think we need to be a little bit more open-minded to learn how the world works.
So since we've talked a bit about families, how do we support families who have been affected by suicide? I know one thing too, you said you were going to teach us mental first aid.
Yes.
I hope we have enough time. But how do we support families that have experienced suicide?
See, I know that...
Without saying it is well, please, let's not go there and tell them it is well, please.
See,
please, please.
When they are going through that initial shock and trauma, they are just like any grieving person. And the first thing is that they lose control. So can you provide meals? Can you just come alongside them? Many times they don't want to talk because they are just simply overwhelmed with grief. Be just there. If it's possible, cry with them. Then at an appropriate time, if it's possible for them to, maybe after the burial and all of that, it's possible to offer maybe a time away from the scene so that they are able to recuperate, you know. These are things we can do. You can offer to pay for their moving away from, maybe a weekend away from the scene. Helps. But also, if we have good memories of what that person, people will always have good things they have done. Sometimes just sharing what this person did that was good, that could help, usually will comfort the family in a lot of measure, because maybe all they've heard is the negative. They've not heard the positive that that person did, you know. One of my persons say that the 40-year-old eventually still died, but he had been in the ministry of helping post-prison people recover enough to fit back into society. It's a good thing. So we need to share with families good things that their loved one probably did that they do not know, you know.
You know, there is more to a person's life than the suicide. You know, when people die by suicide, we make the suicidal act the crux of everything. There was more to the individual. That suicide act probably just lasted a few minutes of his entire lifetime. So we should really not focus on that and talk about. But I think the thing that we need to also understand is that, yes, they are grieving, but they are dealing with a lot. It's a lot for them to process. Another thing that could help is trying to normalize the mourning period for them. You know, let's do everything that we do for any other person that died for the person that died by suicide.
Yes.
You know, sometimes we hurry because it's suicide, so we just hurry and bury the person, thinking that by doing that they would forget. But honestly, it's not. Those mourning rituals actually help the grieving process. So the fact that there is a wake keep, they go and view the corpse, if it's not too gory, They go to view the corpse. We do the normal funeral service, normal burial process, do the normal things that you would do for any other person that died should be done to a person that died by suicide.
And I think everybody, churches should not refuse to bury people. That's my own personal take. I think that every death should always be an opportunity to talk to the living about living right and preparing for heaven.
Yes,
So whether the person was a devil, whether he committed suicide, whether he was an adulterer, a fornicator, a killer, I think we can still have a funeral service for any kind of person and use it to talk to the living, encourage the grieving family. I don't think you should say, oh, because of this person's life or the way he died, shouldn't enter church.
And as I said earlier on, you do that, you're punishing the people that are alive. You're not
Yeah.
punishing the
That's
dead.
right,
The
that's
person
right.
that died has finished his own. Whatever you're doing is your business. So we end up punishing those who are
living.
alive. And then we give them trauma that they would have to live with the rest of their life. So we need to be very careful. Then anybody who has an immediate family member that died by suicide, I think after the initial shock and the burial, we should try and get them help. Yes. Help does not mean that they are less spiritual. Help does not mean that they have a mental health problem. Help just means that you help the person. The person is it might even sometimes be just to be sure that they are fine. And sometimes you would help them to navigate through the grieving process better. You help them to forgive themselves.
Yes.
You help them to forgive other people. You help them to even sometimes forgive God, because
Oh yes,
some
yes. Some
can
people have
be having
disappointment
grudges.
with God
Yes.
for different
Yes,
reasons. Let me
God and
down.
everything. There are several people that would benefit from just talking to an expert. It might be a counselor, it might be a psychologist, it might be a psychiatrist. And it's not everybody that goes to a psychiatrist that will end up with medication. That's one of the things that we need to understand, that sometimes I have patients that are not on any medication. They come, I have people that have been kidnapped and things like that. They just come, you help them to walk through the
it.
experience. So the grieving process for those whose relatives die by suicide might need to be helped much more than the grieving process for others.
And I think the importance of words. We underestimate how important words can build up. How words can speak to a person's situation. You understand? And I think sometimes we're translating the crime to the people, so we're not as kind to them as we would have if that's
They died through other means.
so we need to be really kind to people. I think Anna had already mentioned this question of empathy. If you were in that person's shoes, how would you walk? Let's just be kind. Let's say things that scripture tells us to say.
Okay, they are telling us it's time up. So we've talked about suicide today. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to talk about this mental first aid. Anna is like, you're going to come here again to talk about this mental first aid because we must learn it. So thank you so much. We've been talking about suicide here. Professor Teresa Madu and Dr. Anna Gyang have been here talking about suicide, how to prevent suicide. One of the things that's come out strongly for me is we need to raise resilient children.
Yes.
We need to raise resilient children and to show love to families who have lost people from suicide. Let's not be judgmental. Let's not gloss over issues generally. Not just about suicide, but about things generally. We should create a conducive environment in our churches, in our environment, where people can speak up and say this is their problem. Please, that it is well. That it is well, and similar statements. God is good. He's on the throne. And all those kind of things that you do to just shut people up and gloss over it as if the problem disappears. Please, let's stop. One last word from Anna.
Yeah, suicide is preventable. Help is available. Let's not stop anyone from getting help.
Professor Madu.
Let's talk about our problems. Shout for help if possible.
All right. So you've heard You heard. So let's do better. Let's do better to make sure we prevent suicide around us, be good neighbors, identify suicidal problems, and get help for people. Anna, please, before we, if we notice that somebody around us is suicidal, what can we do?
Let's talk about it. Let's not shy away from, if we suspect
That somebody is suicidal.
asking directly about it will not plant thoughts of suicide in their minds. Rather, it will give an opportunity for them to open up. So ask about it directly
And if
in
they
a
say
nice
yes,
way.
what do
And
we do?
if it is yes, or if you suspect that they are hiding, gently help them to seek, help them to get help. Now, one of the things that we do, I hope that one of the days we'll be permitted to share suicide helplines. If the person is refusing or you don't know what to do, just send us the person's contact. We have a way of initiating conversation, and then we can help them.
Okay, so
Yeah.
she's still coming back. She's going to talk
Perfect.
about how we can help people who want to prevent suicide or who are suicidal to prevent it. So on this note, before the producers will drive us away from here, thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time at the living room right here on Equa TV International. God bless you.
God bless you.